All right. I think it's 5 past the top of the hour.
Yep.
Jaco, why don't we kick it off?
Thanks, Jerome. Good morning and welcome to all the Marsh clients and colleagues, and to Jerome and John from Silverfort. We are really excited about this webinar or the series that we are doing. Marsh and Silverfort has been working globally together in partnership, and we are building on that relationship here in South Africa. And as a result, Jerome offered to do a series of webinars for us. This is the first one, and then 2 will follow. The next one will be on operational technology, which will be closer to the end of March. And then the last one will be on the financial industry or finance, and that will probably be in mid-April, but those dates will be communicated later on. Then John will handle for us the Q&A at the end of the presentation. So if you do have any questions, you can type it into the chat or into the Q&A, and we will answer those questions at the end. The microphones have been disabled, so you won't be able to unmute and ask questions. Jerome, then just a little bit on Jerome before I hand over the microphone to you. He manages the global insurance partnerships at Silverfort, and that's why he's talking to Marsh. He is committed to advancing industry standards when it comes to cybersecurity. He has been involved in a lot of different positions, even at Cisco Systems and Blanco Technology Group. And he's been in leadership roles all across EMEA. So, Jerome, we are very excited to have you here and to listen to you sharing the knowledge with us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jaco. Thanks for the nice introduction. So, yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm really pleased to see so many people attending this webinar. So let's kick it off right away. So the title of this webinar is Why Multi-Factor Authentication is Not Enough. And so I'm really curious to see if everybody shares the same opinion we do. And I'd like to start this with looking at a technology that Microsoft has invented some 25 years ago that is still applied today in every single organization that has on-premise resources. And obviously, I'm talking about Active Directory. Active Directory has been invented, I believe, in 1999, and to this date, it is still the #1 repository for users, groups, and for managing the permissions and every single authentication for on-premise environments in most of the organizations. Now, when we talk to incident response companies, what we're hearing is that for almost every incident that they have to manage, that they have to investigate, Active Directory is involved in some way, shape, or form. There's always something that has to do with Active Directory when it comes to incidents. On the other hand, and that claim comes from Mandiant, but pretty much every incident response firm that we talk to gives us the same number, the same answer. On the other hand, we have Microsoft claiming that multi-factor authentication actually reduces account compromise by a very large percentage. They say 99.9%. So what we can ask ourselves then, why are there still incidents? If on one hand, Active Directory is the system that's holding your users, managing the permissions, and on the other hand, we have a technology that can actually reduce those incidents. Why is it still happening? Well, if we have a look at today's landscape, and not the one that has been built 25 years ago, we can see that organizations use much more for their identities today. Active Directory is still around. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to go away. There's nothing really that can replace it. But organizations have evolved to now also manage identities in other places like Entra ID, like Okta, Ping, and so forth. Now, the problem is that all of these places work in silos. They don't know each other. They don't work together. So Active Directory sits on-prem. You might have cloud identity storages like Entra and so forth. But there is no way these things communicate. So it is very, very siloed. What we believe at Silverfort is that identity needs a unified approach. If we look underneath the surface, we see a lot of blind spots here. One is with that old technology, Active Directory, obviously as it has been invented 25 years ago and really not been updated a lot, there's a number of security gaps. Within Active Directory, you don't really see who's doing what. You don't really see what permissions people have or non-human identities. We'll get to that in a bit. It uses old protocols, not only, but some of the protocols for authentications are very, very old and not very good in their security stack, meaning that they're vulnerable. And it's very easy to misconfigure Active Directory. And on the other hand, it's very hard to maintain properly. Now, coming back to multi-factor authentication, a lot of those systems that use Active Directory for authentication just can't be MFA'd. You cannot put multi-factor authentication on them, just because multi-factor authentication has been developed a lot later than Active Directory itself. So the protocols that were used at the time and are still used today just can't cope with multi-factor authentication. They can't ingest multi-factor authentication. And we'll get into the details of that as well. And the other thing is service accounts are also called non-human accounts today. Non-human accounts are applied, every single organization that has on-premise resources will have non-human accounts, and I'll make some examples later in this presentation what these actually are. We have those accounts that are needed to communicate between machines, between operating systems, between applications where no human is involved. Now, the problem with these is that they're very hard to understand what they're actually doing versus what they have been created to do. So they're constantly being misused. And we're actually going through an attack chain later that shows the misuse of a non-human account. And last but not least, ineffective controls for privileged access. That's a big problem. One of the reasons being that the identity infrastructures work in silos. The other one being that old technology like Active Directory doesn't give you very good ability to control privileged access. So let's go through a typical attack chain, and this is an attack chain that has been made public, I think a couple of years back. So we can openly talk about that. How does the adversary typically work? Well, the first thing is get your hands on some credentials. And there's a number of ways to do that. The easiest is to buy credentials on the dark web, which is very straightforward. Another one would be to use social engineering. Help centers or help desks are today very prone to these types of attack where somebody calls a help desk of an organization and asks for a set of credentials, often claiming to be a third party, an external worker, which is probably you've heard of the MGM case where this is how it all started. So getting an initial set of credentials, username, password is a very simple thing to do for an adversary. So most organizations do have multi-factor authentications in some places. For example, on the VPN side, right? So to get into the organization, you have to go over the VPN hump, which requires you to answer an MFA token. Now, how do attackers do that? One of the techniques is MFA bombing. It's very simple. What is being done there is that the adversary will send an individual a whole lot of MFA requests in a very short amount of time. Imagine your phone rings 10 times in 30 seconds in the middle of the night asking for an MFA prompt. At some point, you will just click on yes because you're just getting annoyed and you want to go back to sleep. So that is what the attackers are doing. They're sending you as many MFA prompts until you just hit yes. And that's all they need. They just need one yes to go beyond that initial hump, to get into the VPN of the organization and move forward from there. And by the way, what the attacker is doing here, what the adversary is doing, is they automate these types of MFA bombs. They don't do this manually, and they don't just do it on one identity. Obviously, they will have a number of credentials or a number of identities stolen or achieved through social engineering, and they just automate this. And they only need one person to say yes once. Now, once we're in the environment as an adversary, what are we going to do? The first thing is recon. We're going to look at what do we have access to with the credentials that we've actually achieved to penetrate the environment. And in this particular case, the adversary had access to shared folders. And so what you are going to do is to do some lateral movement, go from one computer to the next to see what is on those shared folders. What do I see? What intel can I get? This particular case, it's been very simple for the attacker because the attacker had access to a share that contained PowerShell scripts. Now, one of those PowerShell scripts actually contained credentials, a username and a password of a non-human identity of a service account. So that was very simple for in this case. Sometimes to do privilege escalations, you need to apply different techniques. For example, you go look for hashes from that are left behind from old protocols, and then do privilege escalations doing this. But in this particular case, it was very straightforward. You had a plain username and password somewhere in a script. And who doesn't have that, right? Admins just need to work very quickly. Admins need to run their operations as fast as possible to keep the organization alive. And so these things just happen. So once the attacker used this privileged service account, and in this case, it was an account that was responsible for the PAM solution, which was dichotic. It was very, very simple for them to then steal every single credential in the environment just because the dichotic obviously contained a vault. So that's 5 very simple steps of that attack. And these 5 steps were unprotected. All of those authentications that were required in those 5 steps weren't protected. It was just a username or password. So that's 5 control points that were inexistent. Now, why does this happen? Let's have a look at the top artifacts in these attacks. So if we look at a general list of artifacts that are being used, we see things like PowerShell, malicious scripts, PSXSec, and so forth. And what is being used doesn't matter that much, but the fact that most of these things exist on every single Windows machine, that's what's scary. PowerShell exists on every computer. If you have a Windows machine and you type into your search bar PowerShell right now, there will be an executable opening up. So it's already there. What that means is that an attacker doesn't have to bring the weapons to the battle. They already exist in the place where they want to move laterally. So this makes it obviously very hard for detection technology that sits on endpoints to actually see what's going on because the weapons exist already on these computers. Now, if we look at what adversaries are actually exploiting, they go into places where security is least enforced. So this is what most organizations believe. I've got multi-factor authentication on my fence. I'm protected. I use it for RDP, I use it for HTTPS, I use it for my email, for everything that has modern protocols that can actually ingest MFA. The reality is a little different because attackers use ways into the organization where MFA doesn't exist. They use command line tools, they use non-human identities, they use file shares, and you just can't put multi-factor authentication onto these. So that's really where the gaps are. Let's have a look at what Silverfort does. So first of all, we have three major blind spots that we see in the entire identity space. And the first one we just spoke about is multi-factor authentication doesn't exist in the right places just because the protocols don't allow multi-factor authentication to be used. And we're talking about the command line interfaces, administrative consoles, file systems. You can't just put MFA on a file system. Even legacy applications and OT and air-gapped environments can't ingest MFA. OT is particularly difficult just because you can't put an agent on OT equipment. It is production equipment that can't change, so it's very difficult to secure it. Now that's where Silverfort comes in. We do things differently. But let's move to the second blind spot, which is the non-human identities. And let me give you a very simple example here. Every organization that has on-premise resources will have a backup system, right? That backup system will need one identity that is responsible to execute backups. And that is a machine identity, a non-human identity, or a service account, right? So this service account is very powerful because it needs to be able to see every single file in the organization because it needs to back them up. So it is quite a powerful identity, and that's just one, right? Organizations have many of these types of identities. So what this account should be doing is every night at 2 a.m., wake up with the backup service, obviously, authenticate from the backup server to the file server, do its backup, and go back to sleep. Now, what it's actually doing, nobody knows because there is no visibility built into Active Directory for service accounts. And so these are the types of accounts that are being misused. They're very difficult to protect, very often have very high privileges, and nobody knows what the dependencies are. This is where privileged account management has come in, and where organizations have tried to use actually a solution that was created to for compliance reasons to actually protect identities, or specifically non-human identities. But it's been very, very difficult to do, and my next slide will show you why. So let's move on to the third blind spot, which is the privileged access blind spot. So as I said, PAM has been kind of misused to try and protect these identities. And PAM is a very good solution. It does vaulting, it does session recording, and all those things are fantastic. But when it comes to using PAM as a security tool for protecting identities or for protecting privileged access, lots of companies spend a lot of money, a lot of consultancy fees for a year or even longer, and not have the results that they want to achieve. As you can see here, on average, only 10% of companies will have a fully implemented PAM to do privileged account management. So that is really the third blind spot, that it is very, very hard and very painful to really do privileged access the way it should be done. So at Silverfort, we do things differently. I wanted to run through a high-level overview of how Silverfort actually acts to give you an understanding of why why we cover those three blind spots and why those things are very easy and very straightforward for us to achieve. On the top left, we have our identities, normal users, privileged users, admins, or non-human identities. And then on the top right, we have the assets that they'd like to access, the services, the file shares, the databases, and so forth. So what's built into your identity systems is that every single time a user accesses one of those systems, there is an identity request or an access request going to the identity infrastructure. What does that mean? When I click on the file share link on my desktop, what's happening in the background without me seeing it, that my Active Directory in this example will get a request, Jerome wants to access this file share. It happens every single time without me even seeing it. It's not just me logging into the morning where I have to provide my username and password. This access request happens for every resource that I want to get to. An Active Directory will respond. Will say yes or no, Jerome has access or he doesn't. Now, what Silverfort does is we sit on the identity infrastructure. We sit in the Active Directory and we see this access request coming in. And what we do then is we pause this access or this authentication request. We pause it and we apply our policy. We will see who wants to access what system, and we will then, based on our policy, take a decision. So we could just say, oh yes, Jerome sits in his environment. He doesn't require any special privileges for this, so we'll just let it go. Or we can say no, as another example, this is, for example, the backup service account that requires access to a system that shouldn't be backed up. And by the way, it comes from a workstation instead of the backup server. We can just block it. The third thing is we can say, well, we don't know. We are unsure. So let's send a multi-factor authentication to that individual to see whether he actually is who he claims to be. If we send a multi-factor authentication to one of those users, we can actually apply any multi-factor authentication. So we have a Silverfort MFA token that you can use from your cell phone or from your desktop, but we can also use any other MFA product that's out there. And most of the companies that we work with have already invested in MFA. They use Microsoft Okta Ping Duo or even hardware tokens like RSA or YubiKeys or anything that's FIDO2. We can cope with that. We send them any of those tokens for those requests. So the nice thing here is that there's no change in user behavior. The user gets his, let's say, Microsoft token that he's being used to answer for his email, for example, or to get over VPN. He can now use that as well to do command line or for his file shares or for access to his database. We extend that capability. If it is a non-human account, well, service accounts don't have thumbs. They can't answer MFA requests. So what we do there is something we call virtual fencing. We allow service accounts to do exactly what they've been designed to do and nothing else. So drastically reducing the surface of attack here, meaning that service accounts are now locked into their task and an attacker cannot use that service account anymore to do anything else. Now, what's really nice about this architecture is that we don't need to deploy anything on endpoints. We don't have to do proxies in between. We don't have to create an agent that sits on the clients or on the servers. This all happens where the authentication actually happens, which is inside the identity infrastructure. So the deployment is really fast. We're talking about a couple of hours to maybe 1 or 2 weeks. And that's pretty much all that needs to get done to have the system in place, operational and enforcing MFA, conditional access, and virtual fencing for service accounts. So very straightforward to implement. All right, and yeah, obviously we can talk to third-party systems like CIEMs or XDRs and deliver all of our data to those systems. One of the things that Marsh insureds have had to go through is an application form. And so you probably all know the 12 security controls on the Marsh application form. Now, I'm happy to say that if we look at what Silverfort is doing from an identity side, we actually help with 6 of those controls. So half of them we can actually help with, which is obviously MFA, privilege access security, logging and visibility of all authentications, and so forth. So we do have a very quick ROI here when it comes to your application or to your renewal of your insurance. Half of those you can already answer with a yes, or we help with those elements in your application or in your renewal form. I'm not going to go into all of those details, but it's a very, very easy thing to do when you're using your application form. We actually have a report in our system that you can attach to your application form, which we call the cyber insurance report. All right. So where would you start in your Silverfort journey? One of the things that some of our prospects and clients ask us, okay, we've understand the value. This is a completely new system. It can protect the unprotectable. How should I move forward with this? Well, actually, it's very simple. What we do offer for visibility is what we call the free assessment. So let me walk you through this. The free assessment is a tool that you can see as being an inside authentication scan. What you know from carriers and brokers, sometimes what they do is they give you those external assessments, right, where they look at your domain and they will tell you where you have open ports, where you have known vulnerabilities, which is very, very valuable because it helps you getting your security posture a little better. Now, what we are doing is the same thing, but from the inside. What we're actually going to do is we are going to put the Silverfort system into the environment, and obviously the installation is very straightforward. I have a slide on that as well, which we'll go through. And we just let it listen for 2 weeks. We are not going to put any policy in place. There's no changes for end users. We just monitor the system for 2 weeks. What we see in those 2 weeks is actually every single authentication from the identities towards systems. And so at the end of those 2 weeks, we pull out a report that we call our risk report, and that report will show you your identity security posture in detail. It will go over all the privileged accesses that we have seen over that period of time, what was using an MFA token, what wasn't, especially when it comes to privileged access for admins. It is very important to see whether all of those were MFA'd or not. So it gives you this very, very detailed view. These are just 2 screenshots of a report that is 10, 12, 15 pages long. So it is actually a very comprehensive and detailed report that you're going to get. And we've made a calculation of what is the value of this report. Why would you start doing this? Well, actually, what we do here is compared to a consultant that you would employ to actually do that work, going through the Active Directory logs, actually monitoring on its own, is going to cost, first of all, quite some time, and secondly, a lot of money. So we've calculated that the cost to have this report run by a consultant company for you will be between $10,000 and $30,000. So it does actually have quite some value. And we'll share this slide with you afterwards. And the outcome really is every single risk indicator that we have seen, which can be, on one hand, Active Directory hygiene elements, the users that have old passwords, shadow account activity seen, impossible travel, or even attack patterns that we've identified, like Kerberoasting or pasta hash and so forth. All of these will be seen. And then you've seen another screenshot. Obviously, since we see every single authentication, We also see non-human identity authentications, and we'll actually show you where your non-human accounts are and what they're actually doing versus what they've been designed to do. Does the backup server account only do backups, or did we see it do something else as well? So I've put the link in here, and again, we will share the deck with all of the attendees here. So you'll see how you go through this. But before I conclude with the assessment, just to give you an idea, because this is an inside scan, how long does it take you to run this? It's actually pretty straightforward. We're actually doing 3 to 4 calls with you. The first one will take up to an hour, where we prepare the environment. We look at your domain controllers and see whether they're not overloaded already. We don't take much resources, but we want to make sure that the system runs seamlessly. So we do some preparation with you. That takes an hour. The actual setup, believe it or not, will take another hour. That's it. It's very, very straightforward, just because we don't need anything on endpoints. We just need to exist on domain controllers. Then we will look at, does it collect the data correctly? And then at the end, we will just generate a risk report. And that risk report, we will obviously have an expert walk you through and help you with prioritizing your task. Believe it or not, every single time we do that with clients, we see things that can be improved, obviously. Now, so bottom line, this is going to take half a day of your time, but the value is just enormous. You will see things that will cost you a lot of money to see by trying to do this manually. So I would encourage everybody on the call, if there's one takeaway, enroll for the free assessment. Every company that has 250 employees or more can run this for free with Silverfort and see what their actual identity security posture looks like. Now, before we go into the Q&A, I just wanted to say a couple of words why carriers and brokers actually love our technology. We've been recommended by a number of carriers and obviously work with a number of brokers. And so I'm very happy to do this with Marsh today, which we've actually done a couple of times in different regions. But so the main reason why we do this, or why carriers and brokers love us so much is our speed of deployment. We don't send clients to a journey that will take them a year or two to improve their security posture when it comes to identity. We do this in a very, very fast way. And the insurance industry loves that, because the risk reduction that we apply happens in a very short amount of time. And this very often happens prior to renewal or even prior to binding, where we can come in and put MFA in all the right places, protect the service accounts, and even apply an authentication firewall if required, without a big hassle. So we are very quick to deploy. The second thing, obviously, is that we protect the place that is most prone to ransomware. That is the #1 ransomware target. That is our main goal here. All the users, all the privileged and even non-privileged identities, the admins and the non-human accounts. That is our bread and butter. That is what we protect. And that is where the entire insurance industry sees most of the ransomwares come in or have an effect on. And then last but not least, our reporting capability. One, the risk assessment report that you can use for your internal use, but you can also share it with your broker or carrier if you wish to do so. However, we have a second report that comes out of our system, which we call the Insurance Readiness Report. And that one is actually anonymized. So it's something that you can attach to your renewal application form or to your initial application form, and it shows you in what places you have multi-factor authentication, whether all the service accounts are being protected. So it answers a lot of those questions that you would have to answer manually in your application form. It's actually a time saver, and it works in a very, very seamless way. So with that, I would like to open it up for questions. We have some 10 minutes left, I think. And so I would like to have John look at the questions that have come in so far. Anything that you would like me to answer, John?
Not at this point, Jerome. We've had no questions off the floor, but yeah, just from my perspective, sitting on the outside looking at this, I just want to reinforce back again, it's the speed that we fix the issues. It's the speed that we can apply protection that is valuable to players like Marsh in the industry. So, guys, any questions, anything you want to raise, put it in the chat, please. More than happy to answer any of your questions. Jerome and I are here for another 10 minutes. So if you got anything you want to raise or discuss quickly while you've got us, pop it in the chat quickly.
Yeah, I think I've seen people raise their hands while I was talking. So maybe feel free to put any questions in the Q&A. Let's see. Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't see any Q&A.
No, there's
Open
nothing at the moment, Jerome, but
what we'll
So
do is
perhaps suggest that if anybody wants to ask a question, that if they raise their hand, we can
there's a
perhaps
question
unmute them.
here. Could we explain how virtual fencing is configured? It's actually a very good one. So here's how we do this. When service accounts authenticate, we will obviously see that in our system, right? So we'll track every single authentication of service accounts. We will see what the source and what the destination of this authentication is. And then we present this in a very simple view to the admin of Silverfort, who can then see where does this service account authenticate from? Where does it authenticate towards? And 90% of the time, the backup server will authenticate from the backup server and go to the file server, to give you an example, right? So you can virtually fence that. You can say from now on, this is all that service account should be able to do. And you can actually do this manually, or you can have the system learn it and enforce automatically so that it learns behavior of non-human accounts and it then applies that in an automatic way. And this learning phase can be going through an alerting phase as well, if something happens outside of the ordinary, so that you can actually add it to your virtual fence if required. And then enforcement happens automatically. So we can do this at scale. We have clients that have over 10,000 service accounts that do virtual fencing in an automated fashion at scale.
So let me just jump into a couple of the more questions that have come in while you've been answering that one. So that gives you an answer on the virtual fencing side of things. We're not a pen testing solution, but what I will say around pen testing is that we find that most of the guys that we talk to are always looking for credentials to be able to start a penetration test. And because of the ability that Silverfort has to protect credentials and make it extremely difficult for them to be abused or misused, we're a great first line of defense when it comes to protecting credentials to make the pen testing environment much more difficult for somebody to get in. We have got some interesting use cases in the financial sector locally in South Africa with a couple of tier 2 type banking environments where they actually have had to give the pen tester credentials to use to be able to do a proper pen test. So as much as we're not a pen testing solution, we are very much more designed around identity. So we look after identity and we're able to protect that environment. So I hope that answers your question there.
All right, let me take the next one, maybe. Are you able to automate service account password changes? That's actually a very good one. So service account password changes is something that has been applied or has been tried to apply by using a PAM solution where you have a vault that rotates passwords, and then you try and make the service account use the password for the session, which is actually a very complicated task, and it's actually very often breaking systems because you don't really know what service accounts are actually doing versus what they should be doing. We don't believe in password rotation. As you know, it is a very complex thing to do. We believe in reducing the attack surface by ring fencing those service accounts. So the answer is no, we don't rotate passwords, but we do something different, which is easier to apply and much, much more effective because it's actually dynamic, which is our ring fencing capabilities. The nice thing about that is that the insurance industry has recognized that there is a different way of protecting service accounts, and they will be happy to see that you're doing ring fencing versus password rotation on service accounts.
So next question.
Yeah, I actually see the logs here, John, so I can quickly go through because we're running out of time. We still have 5 minutes left. I see another one, which is a follow-up to the ring fencing. It's very interesting to see that the service account questions are accumulating. It seems to be the most important things, and I think this has sung through because a lot of the insurance partners that we work with actually see the value of protecting service accounts much more because they see that that's where a lot of risk comes from. So the question is, so there is a learning phase in which you accumulate rules into the whitelist that you can then enforce later on. The answer is yes. And furthermore, we can actually automate that. So we will see every single service account. We will see the behavior of the service accounts. We will let you enforce these manually, but we can also enforce these automatically. And in order to avoid false positives, we can go through that learning phase where we alert you of exceptions in that behavior that we've actually identified. It's a very simple method, but very, very effective. Okay, let's see. Oh, we have questions coming in like crazy now. So next one, what is the effect of implementing the SOC? Oops, it's scrolling here like crazy. What is the effect of implementing the SOC in mitigating the attacks given that MFA is not enough? So let me take a step back and look at identity or security in general. Security is a very layered thing. Right? The more layers you have, the more secure your organization gets. So MFA isn't bad. It is a very good thing, but it is just one element out of your identity security fences that you should have. And it is not enough to put it on the VPN and then inside the environment, let everybody do whatever they want without having any type of visibility or control. And that's what we change. What is important here is to have those security controls everywhere where it matters. Every admin should do a security control when they use, for example, PowerShell to run a script towards the domain controller, or even use RDP on the domain controller, any access to a highly critical resource. That's where we come in. That's why you need more than just an MFA on the fence. That was a point here. And so to get back to the question, what is the effect of implementing the SOC in mitigating those attacks? Well, I'm not 100% sure what is meant by SOC, but I assume that it is what is meant is our platform. Now, the effect is that now you have all those layers of security that actually cover all of the authentications that are happening and not just part of it, independently of whether it's a new protocol or an old protocol. We actually don't care about protocols. That makes the attack surface go down drastically. It is not just one point in time. Remember that attack chain that I was showing earlier? There were 5 points where we actually could have stopped that attack from happening. It is not just one single point. So that is the answer to this question. There's two more questions here.
How do we prevent MFA bombing, Jerome?
Yeah, it's very simple. We have one metric in the platform that will see if an MFA comes from the same source going to the same destination in a short amount of time, multiple times, we just block the source. It's as simple as that. And that's the thresholds you can set. But if I, as an adversary, send John 5 MFAs in the matter of, I don't know, 30 seconds as an example, I will be blocked from access as the source. As simple as that. So that's how we block MFA bombing. There's also the opposite, which is MFA fatigue. Send too many legit MFA so that users don't even care anymore and just click on yes. We also prevent that from happening. So the last question that we can take, we're actually out of time. I saw a few IDPs listed for MFA implementation. Can you integrate with something like Open Text Identity Manager? I personally don't know Open Text Identity Manager. I would like this question to take as a follow-up and answer per email, but what we can do is we can actually work with multiple IDPs. I don't know for that particular one, to be honest. But we're happy to take that and answer that in a follow-up per email.
Yeah, we'll get back to you.
John?
We'll get back to Jaco on that one.
Yeah.
Jerome, just want to say thank you for hosting this session for us. It's been really good to catch up with you again. Jaco, thanks for your help in getting this up and running and getting the guys involved. To everybody that's sat through this session, thank you. And we're really excited to work with Marsh going forward. I think there's a lot of value in this. We're excited. We want to work with you guys. There's value for both parties. Yeah, this is a great opportunity. We're looking forward to it. So if you've got any questions, fire them off to Jaco afterwards in an email. Jerome and I will sort them out and get them answered. And we look forward to catching up with you in the future.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for the rest of your day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Cheers.